morning, I'm Scott Beuk. I'm the regional manager for the H.O. Trerice company for the Mid-Atlantic and New England territory. And I'm here today at IPS to basically do a overview of our pressure and temperature products. We'll go over form, fit, and function and accuracy and some different applications and see if we can kind of confuse you a little bit more. I have a handout that I put together, very similar to maybe what you've seen before. It's just a quick overview, and it says how to choose a pressure gauge. You might want to cut this part out and put it inside a catalog or a price sheet or something. Not that you're going to ask all 7, but these are basically almost 7 questions you ask, or you might need to cover 4 or 5 of them if somebody's calling in to ask about, I need a gauge. Well, if I need a 4.5-inch gauge, I can almost sell you the 450, the 500, the 700, the D80 series, the 600 CB, and the 620. They're all basically 4 to 4.5-inch gauge. Now you have to get down to what kind of case do you want, what kind of accuracy do you want, do you want a liquid filled, do you want it dry? So, you know, that's what is the process media? Do you need the tube to be brass or stainless steel? I have a clear gauge here. Now this is the 600 CB. This is the step up from the 620. Well, I'll start with the 620. This is the good of the good, better, best. So we have our 620B. This is the mechanical contractor gauge. It's a 1% stainless steel case. Wetted parts are brass. The next step up is the 600 CB, which gives you your aluminum case. Brass wetted parts. Brass wetted parts means what the process is going to see. So it's going to see the socket is brass and goes up into the board-on tube is brass. When it becomes stainless steel, the socket will be stainless steel, the tube will be stainless steel, so the wetted parts then are stainless steel. Depending what the process is, whether it's just water, it can be brass. Also, case in point, as of January 1st of a year ago, all of our brass sockets are lead-free across the line, okay? On the 450s, the 500s, the D82s, the 700s, everything we have on the sockets, the tubes don't have to be because it's not solid brass on the tubes, but the sockets are all lead-free. And the gauges, and we will be changing this because now there's been an update on how we have to mark them. We have a circle with a line through it in PB, so it says no lead. It's also stamped on the socket, and it's also on the box. So actually, case in point in inventory is the new inventory comes in, make sure you move it to the back and move the older inventory out first. We're still kind of waiting to hear how this is going to fall out on the lead-free. Some other manufacturers have done it. Some other manufacturers have only done 1 or 2 portions of their gauge line, and there's another manufacturer that basically hasn't done anything towards lead-free. They're more so in the process, and they're just not going to go into the lead-free market. Now, when it comes down to accessories, we do have both. We have your leaded and your non-leaded, and there's about probably, I think you probably see it across most lines, there's about a 30% difference in price, in net price. Being the lead-free is generally more. We incorporated this into our last price increase, and it was minimal because it's just the socket. So that was already factored in there. You hardly, I think overall it was about a 4 to 5% increase, which was the first in a couple of years. So it didn't hit the market that hard. But on the accessories, yes, we have the two. We have a leaded well, we have a non-leaded well, we have. You know, your instrument valves, leaded, non-leaded, and they get accordingly more expensive if they're non-leaded. I'm telling distributors, for the most part, unless you have a specific customer that wants these accessories non-leaded, I don't know that you really want to inventory them yet until maybe you build a history, but we have them back at the plant. And you'll see in the price sheet where you go under the wells or you go under the accessories, it'll be like your well is 3- drawing a blank on it. Let me go for an instrument valve. 735-2 and 735-2 PBF, lead-free. That's so the PBF will always follow on the lead-free. So there's the 620. That's kind of the entry level. That's what the mechanical coming in generally from the counter, and for many jobs will ask for that gauge. This is the 600 CB. This is the step up. Now this is the one that we have sold through you when they ask for ARRA to be domestic product. Some of these components are brought in from offshore, but we assemble the gauge, we calibrate it, we package it. There's enough percentage of this gauge that we can call it domestic, made in the USA. This shows you basically what the inside of a gauge looks like, whether it's stainless, whether it's bronze. Now, depending on the size of the gauge, will also depend on the system.
We need more people. John, why don't you hand it to Tina? We'll pass it.
Johnny.
You want to give that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
This, I'll jump up for a second. This is the 450. This is the process gauge. This is a solid front blowout back. Now, the two gauges that you have there, most of these, all these gauges, other gauges, are what they call blowout front. If there, for some reason, is a severe overpressure and the board-on tube does rupture, which I have never seen it happen. I've seen them overpressured but not ruptured. It would then blow out the face. The process gauge is what they call a solid front blowout back, where really the dial is on the back of the gauge. Okay? But that then becomes in the face of the operator. So if there is a severe overpressure, it goes out the back of the gauge, not out towards the front. This will also show you, and this is what you can play with, as the pressure is introduced up into the board-on tube, and a board-on tube basically starts out as a ribbon of stainless steel or brass, depending on the range, depends on the thickness. It is rolled, welded, flattened, cut, curved, put into the socket. It's much like a party favor. When you blow your little kid, the little party favors, the noisemakers. When you blow into it, it coils out. When you let the pressure off, it comes back down. And if you were to suck on it, pull a vacuum on it, it gets even tighter. It's pretty much the same thing of what a gauge does. As the pressure enters the tube, it's actually going to try to straighten out the tube. And as it straightens out the tube, up goes the pointer. Okay? And if it pulls back down, it's going to pull a vacuum back down. And that's basically what every gauge does here. The difference of what happens is that a lot of these have bronze parts on the inside or brass parts. This is stainless steel. When you go move up to the stainless steel, it's kind of you get what you pay for. It becomes more costly. You're going to get a lot more cycles, a lot more severe wear. That's why this is really more of a process gauge. But you can also get the stainless steel internals on your 700 series and on your stainless steel D82 series. So that's, you can play with that. That can be dry or liquid filled. So we kind of hit the process media. The pressure gauge range, generally speaking, you want to operate between 10 and 2, 11 and 1, mid-scale. So when you're walking by and that pointer is up in the 12 o'clock range, you can generally just keep on walking. If it's down below or up high, either way, then you may have a problem. And that's, so somebody calls in, they said, well, I need a gauge. It's like, well, what's your operating pressure? And they'll say, well, 40. Okay, well, you pretty much double it. 80, standard range is 100. Now, if they're working around steam, you might ask, are you going to see higher pressures when there's cleaning or any spiking? And with steam, there should always be a pigtail siphon. And the operators generally know that when they install it, they put water in the pigtail. It's a curved or curled piece of pipe. And what that does is if the steam hits that, it actually, the water in that curve, in that circle compresses and doesn't shoot up into the board-on tube and blow the board-on tube. Those board-on tubes, and I don't know anything about piping, but those board-on tubes see the same pressure as the piping will see, whatever that's attached to. And a whole lot thicker. That has to bend and be flexible. It's like having a fine watch. You're not going to drop it on the floor. So there's a lot of things that can happen in the process that might not be seen around the pumps, but can always be seen around the gauges. Dial size, 1.5 up to 12 inches. Generally speaking, probably 80% of our business is 2.5, 4, 4.5 inch. We do a little bit of 2, we do a little bit of 1.5. We do some 6 inch, very seldom do we do 8.5 and 12 inch are available in the 500Xs. This is primarily what you'll see in the boiler room. You'll see the 620Bs, you'll see the 600s. The 500X gives you the stainless steel internals. This really is and this is domestic, we make this in Detroit. This is a super gauge. It can be mounted, flush mounted back on a panel, or it can stand local. When they call local mounting or UC local mounting, it's standing just like that, okay? But you have the options to mount it several different ways. Connection, 1/8, quarter, ½ inch. Quarter inch is pretty much the standard when it comes to the HVAC market and even to the industrial. Because once you get up into ½ inch, all your couplings and everything become a lot more expensive, especially when you get into stainless steel, and even your accessories get to be a lot more. The other thing to remember too is when it's, in most cases it's water or steam, but when you get into certain processes, we will use a diaphragm seal. And a diaphragm seal basically stops the process from going up into the gauge. And what we do is we pull a vacuum on the gauge in the top part of the seal. We reintroduce a fluid that goes in and fills it up. And then this is put on a piece of pipe. And then when this gets pushed up against, it pushes the fluid that makes that go around. The board-on tube is a dead end, is basically a dead end tube. It's not flow through. So whatever gets up into the board-on tube is going to stay there. So if a process is heated and thickens when it's cooled, and if it gets up into the board-on tube, you're never going to get it out. This is one way to prevent that. And they generally in your plants, in most cases, I think your HVAC people aren't going to be using a diaphragm seal. But when you get into your food plants, process plants, chemical plants, things like that, they know that they need a diaphragm seal. They've got problems with seals, and they generally know that they have to have it done. There's different configurations to which we can attach that to the pipe. There's also a smaller one where it's all stainless steel, it's all welded, it's less costly, but it also becomes disposable. So it's kind of application driven on diaphragm seals. And then mounting requirement, probably 90% of the gauges we have in stock are lower connect. We do have on the 700s and the D80 series, we do have some back connects, mostly in, well, really 2.5 and 4 inch on the general ranges. So we covered this, the 620, the 600. Those are both dry. The 450 can be dry or liquid filled. The D80 series, Jim, I think you inventory a lot of the D80 series, right?
2.5 inch, yeah.
So the 2.5, and what we have with the D80 series, it's a stainless steel case. It is a crimped ring, so it's acrylic, and the ring is crimped on, almost like a bottle cap, but it stays on. It can't come off. It's a 1.6, which means, well, let's go back on it and do the easy math. A 1% gauge on a 0 to 100 has a plus or minus 1% full scale. So on a 0 to 100, that can be plus 1% variable or minus 1%, really for almost 2 psi on 100 psi gauge, plus or minus 1%, 1% being 1 pound. When you go to a 1.6, then it would be 1.6% on the 0 to 100. Not a little less accurate than a 1%er. The 450 gauge and the 500X are 0.5, which is a ½ pound. So on a 0 to 100, it's plus or minus a ½ pound for a max of 1 pound variance. which isn't a lot really on a 100-pound. It has to be within that variance. That's how we build them. And everybody builds and calibrates to the same ANSI specs. Every gauge manufacturer has a standard that we have to comply to. So when somebody says that our gauge is a 0.5% accuracy and brand A or brand W also says they are a 0.5%, then you're talking apples to apples, okay? Plus you've got to know a few other things with case and all that too. But that is the accuracy standard. We are all the same on that. So on the D80 series, you have the D82, which is the brass socket, brass tube, stainless steel case. This is a 700 series. Okay. This is the D80. This is the D83 SS, which is all stainless steel, crimp ring, stainless steel. The same with, here's the 4-inch with all stainless steel, and this also has stainless steel internals on the gearing. It's stainless steel. Do you stock them dry, liquid, both?
Liquid filled, the D82s mostly. I
D82s.
think we have a couple of D83s maybe, but mostly D82s.
Okay. We have them both ways. They can either be dry or they can be liquid filled, whichever way you want to do it. Some people like a single inventory, where you have them dry and you can fill them, or you have them both. As long as you have the usage and you're filling them, you're good to go. I did make a copy. This is the D80 series, first page on the catalog. And it takes you down to specifications, the D82, D82 LFB, D83 SS, D83 LF SS. Dial sizes, there's 1.5 inch, 2, 2.5, and 4. Fill is glycerin. Tells you your movement. On the D82 it's brass, on the D83 it's stainless. Now the movement is the internal gearing. Connection lower back, stainless steel 304 case. Ring, stainless steel. Window is acrylic. There's your accuracy. There's your maximum temperature, up to 150 degrees F. Now if you have that on a pigtail, that reduces, on a small pigtail, reduces about 50 degrees F once you get it basically on the pigtail. So how to order, and basically all our catalog cut sheets are the same as in the catalog, as on the computer. If you go onto the internet, it's the same cut. So you follow the D82 LFB, go down to the 2.5 inch 25, O2 for 1/4 inch NPT, L for lower, A, and then you go over to the next page, and if you want 0 to 100 PSI, it's a code 110. So if you look at any of your pressure gauges, they all have the same format. Basically it's a descriptive, pretty much of a descriptive part number. And then when you go to the price sheet, we simplified this over the last, I guess, 7, 8 years, where we used to have several multipliers. Now we basically have one multiplier for the distributor. You are a premier distributor for us, which is the deepest multiplier. Am I allowed to say what the multiplier is, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a 0.36 multiplier across the whole price sheet. So you go to the D80 series industrial gauge, it's liquid filled. There's the D82 LFB, bronze, it's a lower connect. You go over to the 2.5 inch, we were looking at 0 to 100 PSI. So it's vacuum through 600, 2350 is your list price, times the 0.36 multiplier is your net. Okay, now there's freight, there may be other things obviously involved in bringing it in, but that's the net price. With Trerice, there is no minimum. You don't have to bundle, you don't have to wait days to get so many dollars in order to place the order. Whether you order one or you order one snubber, one gauge, whatever, we will ship it to you. We will have the freight accordingly, which is kind of expensive if you're only ordering one. But we also know that we have to react, that if you've got a mechanic or you have a customer that needs something, and we will drop ship if you need to, you want to save a day, we will drop ship it into your customer.
What is the actual purpose of the liquid filled versus the?
Good question. And basically what you're doing is dampening the gauge internals. With vibration, you have the gearing in there, and when it vibrates, they're going to chatter.
Okay. So it's
Immersing
just to
it,
keep it
immersing in a
quiet
liquid,
and-
it just dampens it down.
Okay.
Okay. Now there's pros to cons to liquid filled. On some of them, they can discolor after, if they get heated up. In many ways, they sometimes will get dark. If it gets cold, now glycerin is good out to just below freezing, but it'll get very thick. So if the gauge isn't moving a whole lot, it's okay. But if there is a lot of swing on the gauge, that pointer, you have the force going up into the tube, up into the socket, into the tube, trying to get that tube to go one way or another, which is trying to get that gear to go the same way. And if it has to come back down, that pointer has to come back through that heavy liquid. Interesting, I've just quoted a job up in New York City, and we do a lot of it out in the upper Midwest for a lot of the oil market and fracking and all, where we're, interestingly enough, we're taking glycerin and water. It's about a 50-50 mix, which will go down to like sub-zero. I mean, it'll go down to like minus 40 degrees. Up until recently, if you wanted to do the extremes, you filled it with silicone.
Okay.
But now you don't have to do that. We actually have this other mix seems to be working very well, and I saw it come up on the New York subway job that I'm quoting, that they want the mixture. They don't want silicone. They don't want it all glycerin. I don't even know why they want it up there. It's cold and along the subway is not going to be a major factor for their HVAC, but that's in the spec. And that's no additional cost over the standard glycerin fill. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we don't change that as a standard, because it actually gives the same result by dampening it down, and yet it broadens your high range and your low range temperature. It was kind of a surprise.
So then when ordering it on here,
That's what the LFB, liquid fill.
Right.
It's either a D82 or a D82 LFB.
but then we have to figure out which fill if they want a different fill.
Well, your standard fill is
Is
glycerin.
the glycerin,
And
right?
that's what the standard is right now. And that's factored into that price when you go across the D82 LFB. Okay. And the one below it, actually, when I came on board 9 years ago, we only offered the liquid filled. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, then we started to bring in the dry. And the selling point to the factory was, well, if you bring in some ranges that don't sell, you can always just fill them and move them across the aisle. So we sell quite a few dry. Some distributors like to fill their own, stock the one, and not everybody always needs a liquid filled gauge. The other thing too is with a liquid filled, if you have vibration, you want to stop the chatter. But another thing you want to do is there's also pulsation. If it's near a pump and the pump comes on, you have this force that pushes through. And there is a snubber. In this case, we have a brass snubber. And again, leaded or non-leaded. And basically it has a centered core to it. And there's basically 3 porosities. One's for air, another one's for like light oils, and then for heavy oils. The downside on a snubber is that if the process is not really clean, they can clog up. But for a few dollars, you can save the gauge, and then always replace this. And it basically dampens it. It dampens the force going up and down into the gauge, and this will protect it too.
Okay.
On the more expensive gauges, on the 700 series, I'm not sure about the D83, you'll see in the 450, there it's threaded on the inside of the socket, and we can screw in a little throttle plug in there. That's another way. Ashcroft came out with the dampened movement. The key thing was is getting that center, is getting that little throttle plug in there. You want to stop the pressure from beating up the board-on tube before it gets to the tube, which means you got to stop it down here or slow it down here. The rest of it is just kind of like a final dampening and a final tuning. But that's where the snubber, or in the case too, you can get a pulsation dampener. That's where they become factors. To some of the accessories too, gauge cocks were always the standard for 1,000 years around the gauge business. Downside on, I can't get this one to turn. Downside on a gauge cock is over a period of time they can weep, they can leak. So we're now seeing more and more of the little 1/4 inch ball valve. And the nice thing about this is, and I guess too, probably with this, you turn it and it's up and down so you know it's open. This would be closed, so this one's permanently shut in a closed position. But a lot of people like going to the little ball valve. They just prefer it. You have the red handle on it, it's more visible, it's actually easier, and it doesn't leak. Okay, I think that kind of covers the gauges. You have your, and even in the catalog, the way we outline the catalog is kind of different than the way I presented it. We kind of start with the best, better, and then good. So when you open up, you'll be coming into the 450, into the process gauge. Then you'll go to the 500, and it works its way down. So by the way, the catalog, it starts you off with a better gauge, and better by, it is more costly. It does have a stainless steel internal, has stainless steel gearing, but the biggest gauge probably as for HVAC and industrial is going to be the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest value that's out there really is the D80 series, be it the D82 liquid filled or the 2.5 inch, 4.5 or 2.5 inch. This is where you're going to see the biggest bang. This is an imported gauge for us. We have a very reliable source for it. We've had it for years, and it's very competitive. Price-wise, it's very competitive. It's equal to the Ashcroft Type 1008 A and S, and I would put it up against that gauge any day of the week. I'm not sure of the Beuk number offhand, but it's a decent gauge for us. The 700 series is equal to the Ashcroft Type 1009, and this has really been a very good gauge for us too. We'll jump into the thermometry for a moment. We're most known for is the BX9-1403, which gives you the 9-inch case. Everybody's standardized, well, there is one that does go with green, but most of the other manufacturers have all standardized on blue organic fill now, gotten away from mercury. We've been that way, Trerice has been that way. I think it's been about 12 to 14 years now where the manufacturers got away from using mercury. The easiest way, if you're going into any location or you hear anybody saying, and people need to get rid of their mercury, and you don't want it back and we don't want it back, hospitals and factories or facilities generally have somebody that takes hazardous material away, and that's where you want them to do it. But sooner or later, people have to get rid. They're going to have to get rid of their mercury. The state and the government are coming down harder on that. So one easy way to tell the difference is if you're out looking around, Jared, if you're out on a counter, John, if it's red or silver, generally then it's going to be mercury, because the blue is now the standard. It's organic. It's not something that you want to play with, not something that we want to drink, but it beats the mercury, even though we did like bouncing the mercury around on the table. For those that are old enough to remember that. Jim. Again, we have, and one difference with us, Trerice, we only standardize on the aluminum case. That's all we do. Actually, everybody else has a plastic case out there. And if they want to, they can beat us by maybe $2 on the cost basis. But we will beat probably every one of them when it comes down to the metal case. And you'll find that your facilities people prefer to have the metal case. What happens is many of the contractors, because they'll go in and they'll pick up the lower cost at brand F or wherever, and then what they have is the import thermometers, and they're generally plastic and they generally cost less. But they take them into the facilities, and that's how they work their way in. A contractor will install it. But if you go and talk to the facilities people, yeah, we prefer having it because these cases they'll take a hit. You know, you've got people walking around or doing work on the piping or whatever, and a hose or whatever will hit it. The plastic case pretty much breaks on the first hit. The aluminum case, I'm not going to say they never break. A lot of times they're used to step on. But they'll take a hit and they'll survive a lot longer than a plastic case will. And also, they don't rattle. If you get yourself a plastic one, many times they're just not as tight. They're just not put together as well. Again, we have leaded and non-leaded. This one has a little no PB on it. And again, we have them in stock. I don't know that you want to. I mean, basically, if you order it today, you'll have it here Wednesday, regular UPS next day, if you need it. For right now, until we see how this all settles out, I would let Trerice hold the stock for the lead free. One thing I've gotten into lately, more than, and I'll get into bimetals here in a second, is lagging. And when you use lagging is when somebody is putting insulation around the pipe, because we're all getting so energy-wise. Basically, this is your standard 3-4F2. Now I remember the number. PBF on this one. It has a 3/4 inch thread. It's good for the 3.5 inch stem. So that's where the pipe's going to be. I have seen insulation. Okay, so your pipe is going to be there. I've seen insulation come, up 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Basically, they bury the thermometer in there. Makes it very hard for them to adjust it. For the 3.5 inch stem, and depending on your pipes and depending on your pipe size, if you have a smaller pipe and you want insulation, you can, there's going to be your pipe. Now you've got plenty of room for insulation. And then you can get to and actually take the thermometer in or out if you want to, if you ever want to check the temperature in there. That it's much more accessible and you still have room in the pipe. It becomes a little bit more of a science on the bimetals because of the coil, which I'll just get to in another second. Pass that around. We also do have, and we have a product announcement here, this is the solar thermometer. We, as we speak, have upgraded this. We are shipping them now. There's a very large order going to Canada, so nobody's getting their samples for another month because of that. We now have this pretty much hermetically sealed. We're saying that it can go outside. Time will tell. There are electronics on the inside, but before, if this got wet at all, basically it would kind of short itself out. So we have enclosed the case. We've encapsulated a lot of the electronics. The buttons will be different. Actually, the case is going to be a little bit wider. It's still going to be the 7-inch case. This is the bimetal stem. We also have it in the industrial stem. We have several lengths of the bimetal, as in the industrial. So this too just goes right in there. We see a lot of these in government, in institutions, hospitals, because you have a min and max, and you have your F and your C, which they like because they can go back and forth. I'm probably going to be a Fahrenheit guy till the day I die. But the younger people today are more versed in a lot of your scientific, like the Celsius. So that gives them both. It's like having dual scale, and it gives you an actual number. If the lights go down and it goes totally dark, they do not have a battery backup, but you can shine a light on it, it will come back up, and it'll keep that history from that point forward. To have a battery backup would make that a lot more expensive. You have to make it that people can get in and exchange the battery, and that just gets to be too involved. I don't know that it would be as well received at that point. prior to World War II, if you wanted a dial thermometer, like your V845s, you had to take a gauge and fill the system. This is the one in particular. So it would be a regular pressure gauge with a stem on the bottom, and that would become your dial thermometer. These get to be very expensive. Your net on an industrial glass thermometer is $20 and change. Your net on a dial thermometer is going to be something over $100. And then after World War II came the bimetal. This is one of a kind, which basically gives you it's a 5-inch dial. And what you have is it's a bimetal. It's two welded or soldered together dissimilar metals. As it heats up, it'll expand, it'll coil out one way, and as it cools down, it will coil back the other way. It's welded inside at the tip. The pinion is just straight through, comes out to the pointer, or whether even if it's an every angle, it just has a bend in it, and it will make the pointer turn one way or the other depending on how this coil is reacting. Now, where the science comes into this a little bit is depending on, and I'm seeing more bimetals. Now the bimetal will be, I'm going to say mid-40s, so it's more than double the cost of the industrial, but it's like 60% less than the dial thermometer. But the dial thermometer, we still see them in school projects. It's amazing how that is still in the spec. I like them, they're great for bookings, okay? I don't have to sell as many because they are expensive. They could be using a bimetal just as easily, and many times I've offered bimetals, and it's like, no, we've got to go by what the spec is. We have to use the dial thermometer. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But I'm starting to see the bimetal come into use more even in the boiler rooms and hospitals, because from a distance, it's just like a gauge. You want it basically to read in the upper half. You can be from here to that wall and walk by, and I mean, Jim, you can see where that pointer is from the distance. Put the industrial glass thermometer up, you've got to get up there, and you've got to align yourself with that column, so you have to stop. This allows you to walk by much faster and know if you have a problem a lot faster one way or the other. 3-inch, 5-inch, that's a rear connect straight out the back. We also have the every angle, which is adjustable. And we have a lower connect, which is very expensive, which we just suggest try to just go with the every angle. And once again, we have, here's the difference in the, and this is a 2.5-inch stem. Now, when you get into the low ranges, you have to have a certain amount of coil in the process. This would actually not be, yes, I guess this would be enough. This is enough. This is enough room in the process. For some of the low ranges, this would not be enough room in the process. So you might have to, low ranges actually take a larger coil, because they don't, a lower range would be something like 0 to 100 degrees on the industrial glass thermometer is a much narrower span than, say, 30 to 240, which would be a much tighter coil. So I've run into that recently, and it's not just a issue that Trerice has, it's the way that the bimetal coil works. I think Texas Instrument makes the bimetal coils for all of us, and then we build around that for the case. Do you have a question, or?
That says Ashcroft on the bottom.
It's one of a kind and from my former employee. That's why that's
Nice clear tubes, you see that bimetal strip.
yeah. Well, that's it. That was made for an open house up there 20-some years ago.
Normally that's not clear on the back.
And I took it for
Right.
yeah. Normally it's the stainless steel, and I took it because it was the cutaway, and I said this is a great teaching tool, and I'm glad I got it, because it really shows you what a bimetal is and what it's about.
Screw that, that'll reset that,
No, just adjust. You can dial
but how do I get it back down to 0?
it. Well, it's 70 degrees in here. You don't want it 0 now, or your teeth would be chattering.
And if I would screw that though, and that thing get back down.
It wouldn't be accurate then, yes.
Yeah, the screw on the back and all the process, we do have one where you don't get the screw on the back to recalibrate it. That would be used for calibration or check calibration. You have to have a bath, and you have 3 points, 3 temperatures in the bath of sand, and they stick it in, and they tweak that. So that's why that's there. And some people can play with it, and that's kind of the downside, but actually, people can play with the gauges if they want to also. But generally speaking, it's their lifeline. They want them to read right,
Right.
you know. Hydronics, we've got, we have some plumbing gauges and all in the catalog where you have like a little hose, the end of the hose will go on to check your water pressure. Very inexpensive, they're imported. That one pump company, I don't know whether we still get that other
Shipco.
Shipco, the one little thermometer. But what we've come in with now is you have a 3/4 inch socket or a weld. Put it in, solders. It goes in, boom, done. We also have it with a 1/2 inch NPT thread that'll thread into a pipe and go in. The only thing I get, and these are fine for homes, and I've seen, we sell a lot of these up in New York City in housing projects where they might have a panel and they've got different hot water valves and it's all on copper tubing, which is all smaller, which is where this is great. What I get worried of sometimes, and I've seen gauges like that in 8-inch pipes, and it gets me really nervous because it's just not the way it should be. You should really have an industrial thermometer in there. But for people, for probably light commercial, even residential, many times just pull that. If you watch this old house, you'll see the heating systems down below, and they'll have thermometers across there. That's what they're using right there. And I think that costs you, with the well, or one way or the other, is about $8.25 and $8.50, somewhere in that range. I have a friend who just out in Ohio I went to school with, and he ordered about 30 of those. He did a in the ground environmental system where he's pulling the heat out of the ground, and he says they're great. They're all over the basement, so it's quite a system. We have over 1,000 line items in stock now. I think it's close to 1,100. When I started, I think we were lucky to have 600. So we keep expanding. Some dual scale, some back connect, different sizes. Again, if you get an order in by just 3 o'clock and you have to have it out, we can generally get it out. Don't make it a long list of stuff, but if you need something really out fast, we generally can get it out that day. I think our deliveries are still pretty good. Every once in a while there's a bump because of vacations or something going on, or the weather. But Trerice is a very different company than it was 10, 15 years ago. And we've made a major impact in business out there. So, and I'm free to roam. Make calls, go in and sit down with mechanicals. Obviously, we would just take a couple gauges and 1 or 2 thermometers, features, benefits, and that generally gets them talking on what we can do for them. John, you and I have done numerous calls together. Always helps. So I'm free to go. Thank you.
Does anybody have questions on wells at all, on how to?
Well, and what exactly is the use of the well? What's the purpose of the well?
Wherever there's temperature, there's generally pressure. Okay, just any pressure cooker. So the well is put into the line. There's actually a weldolet. They punch a hole, they drill a hole into the pipe. They put this weldolet, which has internal threads, and they weld that in, that goes on, and then this screws down into it. And generally speaking, when the piping's going in, we need the wells, we need the wells. You can ship the thermometers later, we need the wells, because then they're doing that. You put it in, now they've closed that pipe up. So they can put the thermometer in at any time thereafter. If that thermometer gets knocked, they can take that out, pull that out. They don't have to turn or drain the system down because this always stays in, okay? So, and where there's temperature, there's pressure. So if you were to screw this out while the system's working, you know, the operator's gonna be burned or flooded or whatever, you're gonna have major leaks. So the thermal well always stays in there, basically plugging that hole. And that thermometer can go in and stay in, or if you want to take it out and put one of the test thermometers in, you can put that in, and this always stays in. Same way as really any time that there is a pressure gauge, there should always be at least an instrument valve or the quarter turn or the gauge cock. This way, they can put a wrench on it and they can turn this off, take the gauge off, and it doesn't shut it down. Basically, these are doing the same thing as this. It's closing, it's allowing you to take the instrument offline without shutting it down. And it's only a few dollars. I mean, you know, your cost on the 3-4F2, the leaded, is I think $3.33 for a well.
Right.
To shut that system down, and actually, even though those bimetals are welded, I have seen them leak. I've seen some people will actually put just the bimetal stem into the process. It only takes a pinhole leak. You know, they're not built to do that. The only time that you don't have to put a well on a thermometer is if it's going up in the air duct. And generally, even the thermometers will have a flange that will go on the air duct. You screw into it, and then the sensing unit just goes in there. Because you're talking inches of pressure flow, rather than in a pipe where you might have 30 or 60 psi. That can be explosive for that.
Why is the delivery always so long when we order a gauge with the diaphragm seal that's filled in?
We have some of it that's still a sore spot with me too. We have some of the more generic seals. 316 with a quarter or half-inch lower connect. When we get kind of beyond that, we don't stock as many of them. Don't ever take their lead time as what it should be. If you need it faster than that, go back to Brian, go back to Dave and say, I need it faster than that. I find that our procurement, not that any procurement ever has to be pushed to get things in, but we can do better.
Okay.
We have to do better.
And they have to, once they do a diaphragm seal, they have to fill a diaphragm seal, fill the tube, fill up
We
the
have to
gauge.
calibrate it and all that. I
Calibrate it all,
understand all
and
that, yeah.
it takes a little bit of time to do all that.
It takes time, off the record. Sometimes we take more time than it should take. It should be able to come in, get put aside, go to the table, and get out within 24, 48 hours. Does it always? No. Sometimes it does, but
It's like 2 weeks, 3
that's
weeks.
where you have to push. Well,
Yeah.
You know, it depends how many you're looking for, which configuration you're looking for, and if you're not getting satisfaction, my number's on these pages. Call me.
Okay.
Just give me whatever PO you're looking for, what you're looking for, and I'll call out there. I find Brian's very good with this. Who do you all?
I usually send stuff to Dave, and then Brian is usually the one that responds.
Brian is my inside guy. He is. It was Dan before that. Dan retired last fall. Brian has come in. He's sharp. He's good. He's very quick with what he does.
I mean, sometimes Dave will come back, but it's basically been Brian lately.
Yeah. Well, what he's doing is Dave is Brian's backup to me. But I talk to Brian several times during the day.
Okay.
And I still occasionally talk to Dave on some things here and there, but I always am talking to Brian. So if you want to get something to me, and it's easier for me because I do talk to Brian, to talk to him if you can direct things through him first. because if there is a problem, he will get in touch with me, or I'll say what else is going on.
Right.
He'll tell me.
Yeah, the numbering system that you guys have, that's awesome. That, to me, was one of the easiest things to learn,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I think years ago, they used to have like something, FSL, something flanchless case at the end, and it's like, the 800Bs never had a flange on the back. Why do you call it flanchless? There were just some things that were
Yeah.
done from eons ago, because like the 500X has a flange on it, which was, and a lot of 3.5 inch and 4.5 inch, and a lot of those gauges all had flanges, so that kind of was thought to be the standard. But yeah, we cleaned up the multiplier. Now, when you're looking at the multiplier, and some of the list prices look to be awful high, but when you bring it down to a cost level and that add on to it, it simplifies it. Because on the 500Xs, not too many years ago, you had one multiplier, like a 3/6 multiplier for the 4.5 and 6, and then you had a different multiplier for the 8.5 and 12, and people would take the 3/6 times the 8.5, and it's like, no, that doesn't. No, that's
My
not.
biggest thing is when somebody calls in and they say, I want a 2.5 or a 4-inch face, then I have to kind of like flip through the book and see which one is which.
Right.
If we could come up with some kind of, you know, if you're looking for a 2.5-inch face, look at this gauge, or, you know,
Usually
and
pretty much
some
the-
kind of listing.
The 2.5 inches, water or air, the D82 we stock,
Yeah.
and we got an excellent price on it. You just can't beat the price.
You can't beat
Stainless
the
steel
price.
gauge.
Yeah.
You can sell them all day, make a lot of money.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
liquid filled. They're
And,
great
and
gauge.
it's interesting, when I got into gauges 20-some years ago, how many pool people came to me and said, oh, you know, I've got this 800B and they rust. It's like, yeah, they're steel and they're outside, and they'll fill up with water. Well, can you get me a better gauge? Can you get me a stainless steel gauge? And in that case, it would be like the D82, stainless steel case, it's enclosed, liquid filled, and I don't get those requests anymore. It's been years since I've had a request for a pool gauge, because they last forever compared to the standard pool gauge. So if any of you have pools, there's a shelf out here, or you can ask me.
I already have one on.
But yeah, I mean, the D82, I mean, sell most of what you have in stock.
Oh, yeah.
Some people are gonna want the 800Bs, because that's maybe all they need for that little pump or something. But for your standard everyday customers, it's, yeah, the D80 series is hard to beat on price. Even on the stainless steel, which yes is pricier, but it's a good, consistent gauge. It'll work well.
Thank you.
Start with the liquid fill plugs on the top. The old black one they just used to snip. The new ones, isn't it with the lever, it's one way?
Yeah, well, it even has it, John, I don't know that you'll be able to see it though.
Yeah, I
It has an on and off, and that's the other thing. I had a call from Princeton University about 2 weeks ago, and they got some 6-inch liquid filled gauges, and they said, it's not on zero down there, it's not on zero. And I said, well, do me a favor, now on the 700 series, you have the little flip, okay? So you can relieve the pressure. On the older ones, what you sometimes have to do is you take your fingernail and you just go in and what you call burp it. All 6 gauges came right back to where they needed to go. Sometimes when they fly and the elevation in the freight or whatever, or temperature sometimes can make a difference on the inside. There's even a note here to clip the nipple on the top. I generally don't, because if somebody takes it off and lays it down, it's gonna leak all over. Just leave it on. Occasionally you just burp it. It'll bring it back to ambient pressure or whatever, and it'll be fine. So it's either the D80s have, I think they have the plug, the 700s, I believe, have the little flip top.
Now, do they just flip that top to bring it back down to zero?
Yeah, that's doing what
and then-
this does. It's Leica was the first to come out with it. Then Ashcroft had like a little plunger plug. I think they still do. They just pull up and pull down. We stayed with this, but we then divided it by to differentiate it between the two products. This is more upscale. It's a, they do the same thing. They just do the same thing. Although the benefit of this is you can flip it on, then you can flip it off. Where if you cut this, it's cut. Okay. But actually, I'm not sure. You might even be able to use those plugs in these. I'm not sure about that. But that's all. I just recommend people just use your fingernail and they'll come right back.